If you only look at the big, successful games, then you might think that the concepts came like a bolt from the blue. Something wholly new and radical that took the world by storm. Of course, doing a chronology, I often get to see the little steps that happen along the way. And Gaia no Monshou is one of those little steps. One of the early pushes beyond classic wargaming and towards strategy RPGs. This is the first PC Engine game by Messiah, and they're going to be one of the larger publishers on the platform. Messiah was the entertainment software arm of Japanese computer company NCS. I don't think they ever really had a breakout hit, but they did have several series that gained cult followings. Maybe their best known game in the US is Assault Suits Vulcan, which was released as Cybernator. They did have one other series that was significantly bigger than it, and that's where Gaia no Monshou comes in. Gaia no Monshou was part of a trilogy of strategy games that was released on Japanese PCs across the space of a few months in 1987. Specifically, it's the middle part of that trilogy. The three games in the trilogy are Ethlede, Gaia no Monshou, and Gaia Flame. Gaia Flame will eventually get released on the PC Engine, but Ethlede will remain a computer exclusive. That's a bit unfortunate, because the idea behind them was to create a fantasy epic. One long, engaging storyline. An experiment that I don't think showed up in any kind of strategy game before it. There were strategy games that told a story across a series of scenarios, but not a planned structure across games. Fortunately for Gaia no Monshou, the only thing you really need to know about the story is that there's two kingdoms, a light kingdom and a dark kingdom. The dark kingdom started a war, lost, and now they're trying again. This trilogy of strategy games probably would have been forgotten, except Messiah decided to make another sequel, and that game was titled Langrisser. And Langrisser would go on to be one of the most important strategy game franchises in Japan in the 90s. Gaia no Monshou occupies a special position. The first PC Engine strategy game, a significant push towards narrative strategy games, and bringing something to a wider audience that would eventually develop into a major franchise. You have three options when you start the game: Scenario, Creation, and finally Campaign. Scenario just lets you jump into any of the game's missions, playing them against the computer or another person. You can even take either side in the scenarios. For Scenario mode, everyone has a predetermined army. Construction mode lets you set up whatever scenario you want. You can't design a map, you still have to pick one of the 30 available ones, but then you can lay out the troops however you like. Campaign mode is where the real meat of the game is, and here you have a story told across 25 scenarios. There's 30 scenarios in the game, and the last 5 are bonus, unique scenarios, like pitting the Japanese self-defense force against a dragon. In campaign mode, before the battle you get a screen of text explaining what's happening, and then you have to pick out your army. You've got a certain number of points, and you're free to spend them on whatever you like. Units are rated on 4 things: attack, defense, range, and movement. A lot of units also have certain special abilities, like dragons can fly over terrain, and knights can counter-attack when they're attacked. Obviously, stronger units have a higher point cost, so you could fill your army with a bunch of cheap little guys, or you could go heavily in on some big strong guys. Which approach is best really depends on the scenario. After you select your army, you get to pick out what kind of magic will affect the battle. You can have up to 3 options, though sometimes you won't have any at all. There's about a dozen spells, and they affect your entire army. You also don't have any control over them. Just randomly during battle, the spell might go off and then be in effect for that turn. With those selections made, it's time to fight. You don't have any control over how your troops deploy. They're just laid out automatically for you. On every turn, the game randomly decides who has initiative, and that's deciding who gets to move and attack first. When it's your turn to do these things, you have to select the unit you want to use, and then hit button 1 to bring up a menu. Here your options are to move, attack, flee, or end your turn. Fleeing only works if the unit is at the edge of the screen. and for the most part, you probably aren't going to want to do it. You can attack after moving, but you can't move after attacking. The way that attacks work is, okay, this is going to require a bit of explanation because it's not documented anywhere, including the strategy guide. So I'm operating on conjecture for the most part, but it's educated conjecture. Gaia no Monshou appears to be adapting combat mechanics that you could commonly find in war games of the 70s and 80s. And I'm not talking about video games when I say war games. When you're putting things down on cardboard and having players roll dice for every shot fired, there's a certain amount of streamlining that has to be done. So resolving combat tended to be an all-or-nothing proposition. If the attacker won, then the other side was destroyed. No hit points, no weakening, just gone. And of course, unit stats had to be simplified to attack, defense, range, and movement, because there's only so much room on that little cardboard piece. And one of the more common ways to handle combat between units was both sides roll dice. You roll a 6-sided die and add your attack value. Your opponent rolls a 6-sided die and adds their defense value. And if the attacker is stronger than the defender, the attacker wins, and the opposing unit is removed. Now, I can't be positive that's how it works in Gaia no Monshou, but it fits everything that happens in the game. You'll spend a lot of time swinging your weapons and not able to do anything. Units definitely don't get weakened over time. There also aren't bonuses for supporting attacks or surrounding an enemy. There are defensive terrain bonuses, so you can take advantage of those, and the AI isn't smart enough to stay in the safety of terrain. But for the most part, you're going to want to have somebody with a stronger attack just plowing through enemies. While each scenario has a time limit, it doesn't end when you run out of time. Instead, the scenario ends when the opposing forces have either completely withdrawn or have been totally destroyed. Then you get a little story snippet letting you know what happened, and you get all of the points for your surviving troops back. You also get bonus points if you manage to complete the scenario on time. There's a password that you can use to continue where you left off, and then it's off to the next scenario. This does mean that if you barely succeed, then you probably need to play the scenario over again. You can take some losses, but not a lot of losses. And if your point total isn't growing sufficiently, when you reach later scenarios, you'll be in real trouble. Gaia no Monshou is not well known in Japan. The computer versions get more attention than the PC Engine version. And even there, people only seem to know the game due to its connection to Langrisser. My take on it is that it's very basic. It's not the worst strategy game I've seen, but it is a very bland one. Even the maps aren't really well designed. In terms of terrain, you're lucky if there's a choke point. You often won't even have that interesting of a feature. Other than that, there's very little strategy other than mashing your units together. The only thing stopping you from loading up on units that just won't die is that you need to be able to race that scenario timer, which means quantity is often really useful. That said, it is a game where you can see how other people drew inspiration and then did something more with the concept. And that includes Messiah.